Today, I would love to hear your thoughts around remote work, future of work, and also hear about your career and experience as senior executives and entrepreneurs. So to start, since we're sheltering in place in the Bay Area, I'd love to know what's your new way of work or location.
Well, I think a couple of things. One, I don't know if I've tried to work from lots of different locations. I'm fortunate enough to have sort of a dedicated home office space, but certainly you can feel a little bit what you would call sort of isolated in a single room all day long. So one of the creative things that I have done more recently, this is allowing me to get some exercise in at the same time, is I've actually started taking a number of my Zoom meetings, not today, on my Peloton. So every now and then I will show up on a Zoom meeting, actually huffing and puffing and, on my Peloton. That's probably been the most creative, although having come from England, we always have this notion of a Friday night pub crawl. So every Friday now I like to put a drink in a different room in the house and go around and have a Friday night pub crawl inside my house because everything's closed outside. So
we are located in Los Altos. Of course, like most people on the call, everybody's working from home. I'm actually in the office right now. As a startup founder, this is almost my home, so effectively I'm working from home.
As more teams are working remotely during COVID-19, what have you heard is on top of IT leaders' minds as they're looking to connect the remote teams?
Well, I think there's a few things. I think first off, just on the forefront of leaders' minds, independent of IT, is I think that, as we moved quickly to sort of a work from home, in-home quarantine mode very, very quickly. And that creates a lot of, personal stress as well as professional stress. And I think the top of mind for all leaders is really around how do we lead with empathy and focusing on the human element of what's happening. Why we may not be physically connected with our teams at this particular moment. We do need to be socially and emotionally connected, and making sure that, really from the beginning, the first order principles that, not just myself, but Box leaders was really focused on: take care of yourselves first, take care of your families, and then ultimately really take care of the work. I think that different organizations were in different places in terms of their readiness for this. Often companies think they might be ready, and this really proves out that they are or aren't. However, a lot of organizations, I think, were feeling ill prepared. I think over time may have made more investments in maybe daily operational investments versus business resiliency investments. And so I think that really early on, and I almost feel like it's a legacy conversation to say when we moved to working from home, because that was so 2 months ago. And now we've really gone through sort of an evolution of that sort of storming and forming and start to normalize a little bit. And now conversations have really started to shift much more to what does moving back to the office look like? What does re-entry look like? And certainly it's far more complicated than it was moving to work from home. But I would say that what's really top of mind right now is really around leading with empathy and focusing on the human element and making sure our people are healthy and are feeling emotionally well, and then we can take care of the work.
What do you believe are the opportunities that we'll see from this shift in working remotely?
Yeah, I guess the topic of this webinar is the future of work. So like a few months ago, if we talk about this, people would be thinking about something that will happen in 2021 or 2022. With COVID-19, suddenly we are pushed to the future of work. Actually, it's the future of work is not in the future because it has started. So this whole thing accelerated the future of work. We're experiencing it, and at Otter here, we're trying to create part of the future work. I guess, when people are working from home, a big problem is communication, because you don't see each other physically very often. Well, we haven't seen each other for 2 months, the entire team, we haven't seen them. But you used to be able to walk over to somebody's stacks and ask a question, and when you do a daily stand-up, people can quickly communicate with each other. You see each other's facial expression, you see the body language. Now, it's more complicated. It's more difficult. So I guess one of the biggest challenges is, how do you collaborate? How do you communicate effectively when people are working from home? So I guess, at the Box and other companies, and for us at Otter, while we are working from home, we're thinking, what do we need to do? What new product, what new features can make the communication easier when people are located remotely, or even working from different time zones, right? In the past, yeah, it is happening, but now everybody has to do this. And while working from home, people have children, you have to take care of them. It's hard to focus all the time. How do you handle all of this?
Touch upon the risk side of things. What have you seen are the biggest risks, and how are you helping the teams to avoid them?
And if you don't mind, I'll just add a little bit to Sam's point on the last question, sort of what do we believe the opportunities we'll see. I think there's just like in any, what I would call crisis situation, collectively as human beings, we generally come out the other side stronger and better for it. We just have to go through this initial, disruption, fear, concern, but already we're starting to see lots of potential positives that are coming. To Sam's point, we've been talking about future of work sort of for a long time. And I think that if you would have said to me 2 months ago that the new champion of accelerated digital transformation would be COVID-19, I would have looked at you sort of rather crazily. But what we're hearing now is that lots of organizations that may have underinvested or need to accelerate their investments are really going to be pushing for investments in accelerating their digital architecture, their digital agenda, and business resiliency. I've heard of 3 and 3 as being the most common now, where what would have been 3 years worth of investments at a certain pace in the digital agenda that organizations need to go through is going to happen in 3 months. Well, we know Zoom is an example. We're all on our Zoom call here today, that Zoom went from, I think, something like 10 million meeting minutes per day or meetings per day to 400 million in the month of April. At Box, we've seen 40 to 60% increase in just the usage of our platform. And I think that we're going to see a lot more of an accelerated set of investments in business resiliency, services like Box that were purpose built for this type of disruption. And we've seen it across the board in all forms of communication exchange services, whether that's chat, Teams and Slack, it's Zoom and WebEx, Box, email even, people are still addicted to email, 50-year-old technology, we're still addicted to that. And so I think what we'll see are the opportunities we will see that come from this will be, will be positive in that regard. On the risk side, again, the data is showing us that, I've heard of speed over perfection as being a sort of a mandate that companies are following right now as they're trying to accelerate their digital agendas and roll out technologies that are much more resilient to disruption and working remote. But at the same time, we've also seen an uptick. Responding to a crisis does not mean security threats or compliance risks are any less pervasive. And unfortunately, one of the unintended consequences of accelerated working from home is an increase in security breaches. And now the attack surface has sort of exploded into 1 billion home offices or whatever that might be. We've certainly seen an uptick in COVID-19 malware attacks, phishing attacks, bogus news articles, and things like that. And so I definitely feel as though we have to, as we're thinking about the technologies that we roll out to support our organizations, we're also making sure that we're thinking about our security architecture, our risk posture. And I think the other risk that I would say, and sometimes we think about the technology risks like malicious behavior, but we also have the human side, and we were touching on this just before the call. The risk of burnout, mental fatigue, stress. We've seen a usage in applications like Headspace. I don't know if you're familiar with Headspace. The mindfulness app. Provides guided meditation and tips and practices on sleep and exercise and general wellness. We've also seen a flattening of the working day. Unfortunately, the structure of where work begins and work in personal, it's all blurring together. But I think there's definitely an uptick in productivity because of some of the flexibility in the working hours as well. And to your point earlier, Holly, the one thing I would also say is that, and this is something I've been very conscientious of, is I had a little bit of a blind spot to begin with. And that is, we talk a lot about people working at home with additional stressors in their lives, like cats running around, dogs, or kids or whatever. We have a lot of people that still live alone. They live in studios, single bedroom apartments or what have you. And isolation can be a real problem. And so making sure that we connect and reach out and be very mindful of our people that are living alone, paying a little extra attention maybe over there. I think if not, that's potentially a risk as well.
I totally agree. Especially on our human side, actually, my concern is that when people don't see each other very often physically, people get disconnected. It's it's just the nature of it. It's when you're disconnected, communication is actually, it is hard, as I mentioned earlier. When you meet someone, just everything is easier. You see how they, react, the facial expression and everything. You're physically connected. So when people are working from home, you don't see each other very often. One risk is the human relationship and the trust level. Especially, this is actually even more difficult when you try to get new people to join the team. We actually have been recruiting during this process. In the last 2 months, we have been actively recruiting. So in the past, right, you can interview people on site in the office. So you can build that rapport, you can feel the person. But now it's impossible now. Everything is done on Zoom. How do you build that trust? If you have never met the person in face to face, can you give an offer? Do you trust that this person can join the team? And does he fit the culture? Can people work together friendly or smoothly or productively? So, and the other risk we see is potential miscommunication. Although we have a lot of tools in Slack, email, Zoom, but still, when information is, when people discuss, when A discuss something with B, then B discuss something with C, is the information being transmitted correctly? It could be distorted or interpreted when the ideas or the plans are communicated through the chain of several people. So how do we make sure that it doesn't happen? So, two major things. One is, how do you make sure the communication is not disrupted? And secondly, how do you maintain that trust and build trust?
So what are some of the key trends that you've been observing before COVID and now after COVID? How is COVID is changing the meaning and landscape of the future of work?
And I think if you look at just what has created disruption in the last 10, 15, 20 years, you'll see that it wasn't technology that disrupted organizations. It was enabled through technology. But companies that are disrupting have a different way of thinking, a different way of operating, a different business model, a different sort of culture. And when we look at the future of work and how these companies operate, it's very sort of much this new style of employee. It's a digital native employee, employees that have grown up digital and educated by Apple and Google and Amazon, entering the workplace with a different set of expectations, a different way of working. Work is more of a state of mind, not a place. But what we've also seen is, just in the last number of years, is as we've seen the acceleration of, or not acceleration, but maybe call it proliferation, maybe that's the right term, of really these best of breed services that are maniacally focused on being the best at what they do. It's like Otter and what Sam's doing over there, maniacally focused on being the best at translating conversations and so on, and integrating that. They're the best at that. Let's integrate them into our service. Why do I need to go build a translation service? I'm going to go integrate with Otter. Why do I need to go build a video platform? I'm going to bring in Zoom, and then I'm going to bring in Zoom and Otter, and the two together make for a much more powerful, and better experience. I think best of breed, leveraging the ecosystem of innovation from services that are maniacally focused on being the best that they are at what they can do, and then pulling that through is definitely, we can talk about machine learning and other things, but those are definitely, I think, the things that I've seen sort of pre-COVID starting to emerge and now really starting to accelerate post, or we will start to see acceleration in post-COVID as well.
Yeah, for us, Holly mentioned artificial intelligence. That's definitely one thing, when we started the company 4 years ago, obviously we didn't anticipate COVID-19 4 years later, but the idea was that, voice is such a universal, well, it's the basic medium people use, the basic method people use to communicate. So just how much talking we're doing every day now. You can search your email, you can search your Slack messages really easily, but can you remember what other people told you last week? I can remember maybe 3%. But if you think about the amount of time you spend in meetings and either in the past, in-person meetings or phone calls, or now mostly video conferences, the amount of information being exchanged is huge. But people, it just with all the information overloading, the Zoom fatigue and everything, the amount of information you can remember is very limited. So you actually spend many hours every week in meetings, but the information you can remember is actually quite small. So how can we use artificial intelligence to solve this problem? Can you make the meetings more effective? Can you get information really fast? Can you use AI to summarize the meetings, right? it's a lot of interesting questions. It's good that with the deep learning today, we can do really high accuracy meeting transcription now. So this is what you're seeing right now, with this live transcription. Everything is being captured. So you can scroll back 50 minutes and see what other people said before you join the meeting. You can search for anything. And we actually also allow people to do interactive commenting as well. But transcription is just the first step. It's not just capturing the pronunciation and translate that into words. The more interesting part will be having AI analyze the sentences, even in real time. If I said, okay, how big is the internet, or how many Zoom active Zoom users a day, the other AI technology can track that or look for the information in real time, right? So this is actually just opening the door to a lot of new opportunities.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'll pause. There's, I guess, more questions we can discuss.
Speaking of trends, and if you were to predict how we work in 5 years, what would those predictions be?
So I think it's a little tricky to say what it would look like in 5 years. I do think, though, that what is happening, and this goes to exactly what Sam was talking about, that as we have now got to the point of where the information that we are ingesting, as an example, we ingest 30 to 40,000 files a second into our Box platform, process 23 million queries a second. And that's just one massive data pool of unstructured content. And we're able to integrate, we have a thing called Box Skills. We can integrate translation services, transcriptions, image recognition, sentiment analysis, the services that are being built now to ingest unstructured content and turn that into value, to the point of where we're starting to see more and more automation. You're now really starting to see a lot of RPA. I like to call it not machine learning, but more digital labor. We're starting to see, I had this term that I use. It says if it takes a human being less than a second to think about it, then it can be automated. Not that it has been automated, but it can be automated. And if you look more and more and more about what services that are emerging, especially in machine learning areas, they're taking care of digitizing manual steps and processes. And it's not like you just press one button and the whole process is digitized or automated. It's incremental. And we're seeing now this reliability is starting to go up, dependability is going up on data-driven predictions. That is where I'm really seeing sort of the next 5 years. It's going to be more and more and more of how do we take out sort of standard, repeatable, and things that human beings have been doing so that they can go work on higher value work. This isn't about replacing human beings and sort of robots replacing the work that human beings do. This is about replacing the work that, in the most part, humans don't want to do anyway, because it becomes standard, repeatable, sort of menial type work. And how do we shift their time to higher value? And I think that to me would be at a sort of macro view what I think the next 5 years will be focused on.
I think that one angle is that, when we talk about the future of work, the communication it's such an essential part for any work. So, we have a lot of tools today. We have email, we have video conferencing, phone calls, Slack messages, and storage on Box, Google Drive. We think that moving forward, all these tools will be more unified in a way that they are all connected in some way. It doesn't have to replace each other. It doesn't have to be one big tool, but all these tools will be connected. Each tool, of course, is really good at one thing or a few things, but one tool cannot do everything. One thing we are focusing on, of course, at Otter is about voice communication. We think that Otter eventually, or a combination of several tools, will capture all the voice communications, no matter where it happens, in person, phone calls, or video conferencing, and connect all that with other tools like Slack. If you think about Slack, is mostly communication by text messaging, right? But when you talk to people, you're effectively sending voice messages to each other. On Slack, it's mostly asynchronous, but when you're having a meeting, you're having synchronous communication by sending voice messages to each other. However, of course, you can send voice messages to each other asynchronously as well. So if you think about it, the voice meetings and Slack communication in the Slack channels are basically the same thing, although you're either using text or voice. On Zoom, you're doing a video and voice. But now, Zoom has integrated Otter into the system as well. So in addition to video and audio, you can also get information through transcript. And the transcript also allows you to actually communicating by using annotation or comments, highlighting, and as I mentioned, AI will also identify important parts for you, important numbers or action items or summarization. So I think a big part of 5 years from now, all these tools will be really nicely connected. Several medium, video, audio, voice, text, will be fully integrated. So we'll be even more productive.
I think that also if we don't end up building out, I mentioned earlier, new style of work, new style of employee, which isn't so new anymore, but we still call it new style of employee, the sort of the digital native versus the digital transient. And you think about what we call new style of workplace, which we haven't touched on yet, but I think, if we have time, we can do so. And that is, what does the future workplace look like? Mm-hmm. Not just the future of work itself, but the future workplace, because clearly the workplace we had previously or previous to COVID was built for anti-social distancing, right? It's like a campus is designed to bring hundreds, if not thousands of people together in close proximity to work with each other. And a lot of the things that are being done today to introduce social distancing and so on are actually counter to the way a lot of our office environments are built. But if you think about the technology that we have to support the running of our businesses and our employees to be their most productive, we have this notion of take the work out of work it box. How can we create digital experiences that really allow our employees to be their most productive? Because today, if we don't have an environment that allows the digital native of today to be their most productive, it's really hard to attract people to come and work at your organization, and it's going to be really hard to keep them. And finding good people is hard today, and keeping them is even harder. And you have to have the right environment that allows them to be their most productive. Otherwise, that will be a challenge for organizations going forward.
I would love to know in one sentence, why are you doing what you're doing today? And could you tell us some key decisions you made early on that you're really happy about? What are some of the things you wish you could do differently? Was there any turning point in your career you can tell us? And what were some of the key learnings that really propelled you to the next level of your profession?
Well, I don't know about one sentence, other than uh, you know, in the world of technology, which is we've chosen to be our profession here. The opportunity to reinvent yourself over and over again is probably the thing that I enjoy the most. It's also the hardest as well, because you have to be willing to give up a lot of things that you've sort of become an expert in or learned in order to learn the next sort of set of new things that, you know, either course correct you in your career path or move you into a different career path. You know, I like to say that, you know, that I don't have a career compass. I never had a career compass. The only thing I was drawn to was technology early on, and being a software developer, which I did for many years. But I think that the draw for me was always, you know, I was a COBOL programmer in 1987, so I'll show my age a little bit there. But, you know, I was a programmer in Clipper. I programmed in C and C++, in Java. But if you ask me today, actually, I feel like I would like to sit down and do some coding. But if you asked me to sit down today and code, I couldn't do it, right? I'd have to go back and retrain and so on. But I think that learning, you know, how to develop software, how to lead large programs, implement, you know, how to run operations, how to think about business processes, you know, and everything from networking to desktop to security to cyber risk and so on. These are all the things that collectively create a set of experiences that, you know, allow you to lead organizations. You know, I have people that are in my organization. I've led organizations with several thousand people in them, and trust me, there are people that are far more of an expert in their particular area than I was. But I had all of the building blocks and all the pieces and all the breadth of experience to be able to lead and manage. And actually, leading and managing is something that, again, is a choice. Some people prefer to stay as sort of an individual contributor and become very, very deep and an expert in particular areas. Others choose more of a management leadership path, if that's what sort of gravitationally pulls you there. So I think that's, to me, that's sort of how I ended up sort of where I was. Obviously, having worked for some great companies and worked with some great mentors and people that you can learn from. I sometimes joke, you know, in your career, you should at least work for one bad manager, maybe two. You can learn so much from what not to do. Learning what not to do is equally as important as learning what to do. And unless you work with some, you know, with some really, really good mentors that you can learn from, it's very hard to just learn yourself, right? So I would say that the thing that I would, if I had a chance to go back and have another run at this, certainly I would have started to contribute and build my professional network much earlier. Today it's a lot easier because we have the services that are available to, you know, whether that's LinkedIn or what have you. But it's not just a case of connecting, it's also a case of contributing and giving. And I think if you give to your professional network, you contribute to your sort of community of your community, your professional community, and you do it in a way that isn't with the expectation that you will get some type of return. You do it because it's the right thing to do. I think serendipitously over time, the network will reward you in some way. You don't know what that is. You don't know when it will be, whether that's a year, 2 years, or 5 years, or 10 years. It just happens that way. And so if I had the chance over again, I think I would have started that much earlier, because it's not something that you can just go accelerate or do overnight. It takes time to build it up.
For me, well, I worked with a lot of really smart people. I guess learned a lot from them, you know, either in college, graduate school, in Google. You know, I'm never the smartest kid, But when I'm immersed with the people who are much smarter than me, I learned so much from them. And then, for me, I don't know whether it's nature or not, I tend to maybe create trouble in some sense. I try to always suggest something weird or crazy that not everybody would be happy about. So eventually I say, okay, I'll do something myself then. So that's why I quit Google 10 years ago. So it's time flies. Now it's the 10th year I left Google. And I've been trying to survive in the wild in Silicon Valley. So one thing I enjoy doing is I always come up with some really crazy ideas, but then I try to figure out a way to achieve that. And then it's not always easy, because when you're trying to do something too crazy, everybody will tell you it's impossible. So for me, I somehow developed that immunity to rejection. When so many people tell me, I talk to hundreds of VCs. I would say 99% of them told me, that's impossible to do, or nobody will use your stuff. But somehow, of course, I do listen. I try to learn from their advice and whatever ideas they have, and help me build the product or build the business. But somehow, I just got so thick-skinned. I'm not discouraged by all the rejection anymore. I sort of use them as a motivation to say, hey, I have to work harder to prove these people wrong. So when we started Otter 4 years ago, the one theme we had was, okay, what if we record all the conversation in the world? What will happen? So everything that I experienced in my whole life can be searched. That would be interesting. So we actually did some calculation. If one person can live 100 years, then suppose you speak or listen 5 hours a day. How much data is it? We actually figured that it's not that big. You can actually put everything in your life on a USB drive. It just takes a few terabytes. So then I thought, okay, that would be interesting. So let's try to make it a reality. So that's how it started. Of course, we need to figure out a path to build a business first. So now we're focusing on meeting first. But eventually, I think 5 years, 10 years, I don't know when, then basically all the voice data will be captured. Of course, there's security, there's privacy you need to protect, make sure the government doesn't get a hold of it. But I think everything is possible. So I guess one thing is you do need to take a risk. You listen to other people, but you need to make the judgment to pick what you listen to, what you accept, or what you reject, and pursue something you're really passionate about.
How do you build trust with your team, and especially sometimes your manager and yourself may have different styles?
It's one of our values at Box, and it's assume good intent. You do run into people that may, when we talk about trust, I think that sort of lends itself to environments that tend to be politically charged, where people have motives that are different than yours or different than the company's. And I think that this comes back to culture of the company. Building trust there's two sides to it. Trusting in sort of people's motivations, but then trusting that they're going to perform or do the work or do the role or whatever it might be. And I think those two are slightly different, right? One of them is around motivation, and one of them is around sort of the performance. And to me, the implied trust is assume good intent. So that's the motivations are, assume good intent there. And then the other side of trust, and I think, Sam, this touches on something you mentioned earlier. We've been recruiting and hiring people pre and during this COVID situation. And it's different, right? I think it's different for people to build trust in their capabilities and their work output and whatever that might be. Takes time, generally anyway, and it may potentially take longer when we're in a, or maybe slower to get there in a situation where we're all working remotely. To me, the fastest way to accelerate the trust of working with someone is when you're thrust into a situation like this. Even, when you're working on very complicated situations that are very challenging, that have gone wrong, who is there to stick with something and coming out the other side? I think, Sam, you mentioned this earlier about, can't be done or something. When we have these big disruptions like this, what do we learn together through the challenge? That's why I think we always say, no good crisis should go wasted. There's a great opportunity for us to come out the other side of this with stronger trust with who we work with and work for. So,
to be honest, a lot of potential conflicts, because when you have a lot of people have different opinions, different experiences. When you talk to them, when I said something, people can interpret differently. It could be different from what I intended to say. So there's always a lot. Miscommunication can always happen. So you can't assume that everybody interprets things the way you want them to interpret it. So be prepared that mistrust can happen, but you do want to be sincere. You do want to be honest, and keep everything as transparent as possible. So I like I don't know if people heard about Ray Dalio. He wrote a book called Principles. One of his principles is radical transparency. He is the founder CEO of this largest hedge fund in the world. It's called Bridgewater Associates. One thing they do actually is, in the past 15 or 20 years, they record all their meetings and they share most of their meetings with their internal teams. So that's one way to keep things transparent. When things are transparent, people develop a higher trust, because when information is asynchronous, or different people have different information, people get uncomfortable. So this is also very consistent with what we are trying to do here. We're trying to get all the meetings captured and share as much as possible. Actually, in our own company, in the last 4 years, almost all the meetings are in the Otter system, and we share most of them with basically everybody. So, when people know what's going on, they tend to trust you more. And of course, when there is conflict, the best way I found is, try to be as candid as possible. Sometimes people do get offended, but you don't want to sugarcoat everything. You have to tell the truth. and you just have to handle the potential conflicts. But most people are mature, they're professional. When you are sincere, they're sincere too. So it's mutual.
What do you think about the impact of economy and investment?
We're seeing a number of statistics that are showing where the focus of investments are going to be, at least for the immediate future, and also where investments are going to be pulled back. And the impact on the economy, of course, is quite devastating certainly to certain industries, especially hospitality and travel and sports and things like that. Anything that involves large movements of people and gathering. And even if you think about commercial real estate, a lot of companies are reevaluating whether or not they are going to renew leases in certain office spaces, and do they need this carry the expense when they're productive from working remotely, especially for some of the smaller expensive office spaces. So there's certainly some industries that have been hit much harder than others, and may never come back to the levels that they were seeing pre-COVID. That's just sort of one of those unfortunate circumstances. But what we are seeing is we're starting to see other areas that are going to see significant investments. It's one of the things that we've seen is that governments were not ready at the sort of with the technology levels that they needed to be at in order to support this. You may have seen that as one example. Box, we recently brought on board the USDA. They realized that, hey, look, we need to accelerate some of the investments we need to make in technology to be resilient through certain situations like this. And there are many others like that. So we're seeing a lot of investment coming from the government sector, healthcare, pharma. And so I think it's not that there's a shortage of investment dollars to be made. I think what it is where it's going to be targeted. And so I think startups that are going to be investing in capabilities that are going to be focused on government, healthcare, pharma, or even platforms like Box and Otter that actually are very horizontal in nature. They support every vertical industry. I don't think you'll necessarily see a slowdown there. And you may actually see an acceleration, to my point earlier, 3 and 3. You're going to see an acceleration of investments coming from companies into these areas, communication exchange services especially. So even though I think that we have a big depression that's happened, it's hit the economy and unemployment and just the terrible situations that are occurring there, there will be a significant set of investments, I think, going into all of these areas that are going to be making our businesses from an operating perspective resilient to the next COVID-19. I don't know if it's called COVID-20 or whatever it is. I'm not a scientist in that, but the next one, or COVID-19 comes back again, it comes back in the winter, whatever it might be. There's going to be waves to this, and investments in resiliency is going to continue and accelerate.
As Paul said, the communication, collaboration, all these sectors will accelerate. And of course, with AI, with deep learning, the productivity, the collaboration can be dramatically enhanced. Specifically, we really touched on, the remote working, distributed workforce, all the tools that make these work better, Zoom, Slack, Box, Asana, they will continue to grow, and there will be new startups that will be born and invent new ways to work more efficiently. Online education, my sons, I have 2 boys, they're others in class, the schools are closed, but they're taking classes online over Zoom, Google Meet, maybe Microsoft Teams. How to make the online education more effective? Can they learn even better than in classrooms? right? Yeah, Paul also mentioned healthcare. We really seen that there. I myself already saw a few startups, getting faster, getting funded even faster. Telemedicine. Right now the AI, when they look at the radiology images, in certain cases they can actually have even better accuracy than a human radiologist. But actually, when they work together, both the AI and the doctor work together, the accuracy is way higher.
I think you're going to see one area that, like we said, where you're going to see some shifts of things that occur naturally. It won't be a drying up of funding, but it will be, where does funding move to? And I think we're going to see a lot of investments in technologies that are more touchless or contactless. So services that, or startups that are in that space, I think we'll definitely see some ingestion.
What's your words of advice to the community? How do they find mentorship? And what advice do you have for entrepreneurs or mid-career professionals?
Diversity in any organization has proven over and over and over and over again, you will have better outcomes with diversity of people, diversity of background. And I think that in some ways, that's what makes Silicon Valley such a great place, is that the diversity of thought just generates so much better outcomes. It's just proven over and over again. And so I think that that's something that's really important. Though, if I would say any one particular thing that sort of, I would think about is, it's an investment in social aspects. So if you look over time in anyone's sort of career progression, and you look at people that have progressed in their careers to, say, being organizational leaders and influencers, inevitably their transition from being a what you would call someone who is sort of think about social and participation. The social and participation aspects of their time spent goes up, and their task-oriented focus goes down. It's not like anybody who manages large organizations or leads large functions has more time in the day. We all have the exact same amount of time in the day. And so what are we spending our time on in order to scale as individuals? And so I think that was in the question there. And I think sometimes what I find, and maybe this could be more culturally attuned, I don't want to say I'm an expert on this. Certainly in the Asian people that I work with, wickedly smart, academically brilliant, and quite, to Sam's point earlier, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I'm in the wrong room. And I think, though, that what can happen sometimes is when you spend so much time on maybe sort of the technical and the academic side of things, you miss investing as much in the social and participative side of things as much. And studies show that in organizations, especially as organizations get bigger, your ability to socially connect and be effective in a large organization is driven by your influence from your social and participative connection with the organization. Obviously, you have skills and expertise in order to be at the company in the first place, but then how do you build a career at an organization? And it can't just be by being really, really good at the expertise you have. It also has to be broader, and think about that social and participative investment that you need to make as well.
I think that's a really important point. It's the diversity Paul described. This is, Silicon Valley is the perfect environment. The one thing I like to stress is the growth mindset. When people are in their early careers, of course, for immigrants, I came from China myself. It's a common question, how do you dealing with the visa, the green card, you need to settle down, get some kind of a security. But in the meantime, you want to invest in yourself. The biggest investment is in yourself. How do you build your foundation, your social network, your skill set? And you need to pick a team, you pick a company that can potentially grow 10 times, 100 times. You always want to favor the right experience over short-term cash. You want to bet for the future rather than the next 2 years only. You say, hey, do I get $100,000 more in the next 3 years? Absolutely. But if you join the right company and you grow with that company, it's not a matter of 2 or 3 times growth. It's like 10 times, 20x. Of course, it's really hard to predict who is the right one. The VC is trying to predict that, and they make mistakes all the time. But what you want to do is try to do all your research, pick the right one, and also ask, okay, if this company failed, do I still learn a lot during that journey? So of course, you want to make sure you hope you get the financial return, but of course, nobody can guarantee that. But if you really like the team, do you really think the product is cool and you can learn a lot? Even if the company failed during that journey, you still learn a lot. Then you can prepare yourself for your next adventure.